In the previous videos, we talked about how to install a brand new component, how to create a brand new component in the Duo UI Next. We also talked about how to migrate an existing component from the current Duo UI to the new Duo UI Next. In this video, we are going to talk about how to actually use those components from the component library from Duo UI Next in your consumer projects. But before we begin, before we talk about that integration part, we have to understand what is the difference between the Duo UI and Duo UI Next in terms of delivering the components to the consumer projects. So in one of the videos, in the very first video in this series where I make the presentation of technology stack for Duo UI Next, I mentioned that it is suggested to use shadcn delivery system in favor of the NPM packaging. So let's talk about that part for a second. Let's talk about what is the NPM packaging and what is the shadcn packaging. So when it comes to NPM packaging, this is quite well known, right? NPM packaging is when your whole component library is delivered in one package, all of the components packed in a box, delivered to your consumer project, and that's pretty much it. At the same time, shadcn delivery system is quite opposite. That's why it is regarded to be an anti-packaging system, which is, as the name implies, quite opposite to what NPM packaging does. So in shadcn, one can install one individual component out of the whole component library, just one particular component, and instead of pulling in all of the dependencies of NPM package, so dependencies shared between all of the components in the component library, shadcn allows to install only the dependencies meaningful for that particular tiny component. So when NPM gets installed, it puts everything into the node modules, and it is kind of like the black box. It stays there. You do not really touch it that often. While shadcn delivers the component directly into your code base for you to customize, play, update, or use as is. So technically speaking, shadcn delivery system is just sugarcoating on top of just simple copy pasting of the components. I know it sounds lame, but please bear with me, and I think that we will figure out why this particular delivery system is a more suitable one for Duo UI Next. So with that, let's talk about the differences between NPM packaging and shadcn when it comes to some practical aspects. So what is the practical difference between NPM package and shadcn delivery system? Let's begin with the actual packaging. So when NPM package is delivered into your consumer project, it is delivered in the form of all or nothing. So you either get all of the components and all of the dependencies for the component library, or you get nothing, right? You don't install this package, this dependency. This might be seen either as positive or negative. But when shadcn, as we mentioned, when shadcn is distributing the components, you install component one by one, whenever, like only those components that you actually need to use with their particular dependencies. This has some side effects. And this all or nothing approach in NPM might also have some negative consequences. Let's imagine a situation when you use a component library and then it introduces some breaking changes, right? In your consumer project, you either have to address those breaking changes right away for all of the components, even if the breaking changes are in the components that you don't even need, don't even use in your project. You still have to address them right away, or you stay on the previous version and you lack on the improvements for those components that you actually use. When it comes to the shadcn, it's a granular approach. You own the components that you need. shadcn delivers them and copies them into your code base, so you can either if you need an updated version of a component that you need, you just go and install and update that particular component. You do not need to deal with the breaking changes of other components. You can update one component, you can stay on the old version for another component. You have much more granular control for this part. So in this particular area, I would say that npm package is a good choice for robust, stable, and not so dynamic projects where things don't change that often. At the same time, for very dynamic, very high pace and high velocity projects, like for example, new agentic platform, shadcn provides a much more flexible and much more quick delivery system that is much more reliable than npm packaging. Another difference between npm package and shadcn delivery system is related to debugging the components. So both are equally good for debugging the components while you're working in the context of your component library. Let's say when you update the component, when you create new components, when you need to deal with the components within the context of Duo UI, it doesn't really matter whether you package it as npm package or shadcn registry. When it starts playing a significant role is when you have to test integration of your component library into a consumer project. In our case, it can be an integration into the monolith or integration into a web view in the language server. Here is where shadcn truly shines to me. Again, when you deliver your component library, let's say Duo UI, as an npm package, it sits in your node modules. And in order to debug any component, let's say there is a problem that you have to fix. So in order to fix this, even to debug that problem, you go back to the Duo UI, so upstream, you have to debug this in the isolation first, then come up with some fix, and then you somehow have to deliver those built changes into the consumer project, either monolith or language server. So you have to either master Yelk, npm link, or just very boring solution. You just run build, copy dist and src folders into your consumer project, into language server or monolith, test, and then rinse and repeat. Go back to Duo UI, make the changes, build, copy paste, and again and again and again. This creates a lot of it requires a lot of efforts in order to debug things. Also, at the moment you found the solution, the problem is that you cannot just leave those changes in your consumer project, right? You have to make you have to push an MR towards Duo UI, wait for this MR to be merged. Duo UI gets a new release, update the version in the consumer project, make the release of that consumer project, and only then you have the fix. And now just think about it. If the problem was not fixed or was fixed poorly or not in that place, you have to get back to square one and start all over again. Now, what is different with shadcn is that when you, in exactly the same scenario, when you need to debug a component, let's say there is a problem somewhere in one of the components in Duo UI, the components are not somewhere else. They're not in the upstream. They are in your consumer project. They have been copied using the shadcn tools. They have been copied into your code base. So debugging a shadcn component from your component library is no different from debugging a local component in your consumer project. As easy as that. Now, you debugged, you fixed the problem, and then how do you deliver this to the customers? In case of shadcn, since your component is local, your consumer project is vendoring that component, you just make the MR towards that consumer project right away and deliver the fix to the customer as quickly as possible. In parallel, at the same time, you have to map the same fix to Duo UI next. In this particular case, of course, you still have to merge to push this, but so technically the amount of work is more or less the same when it comes to pushing the change to production. You still have to make at least 2 MRs in the consumer project and in Duo UI, but you can do those in parallel. In case of shadcn, means delivering the quality to the customers much quicker and with much more predictable result, because you can test the component right there in the integrated environment without mocking or mimicking anything as you would do in the context of plain Duo UI. Now let's talk about how the shadcn delivery system is actually built, how to use this, how to add components into this delivery system, and how to use those components. So the interesting thing is that shadcn delivery system is very, very simple. I said that technically shadcn delivery system is just about copy pasting, and that copy pasting is based on the paradigm, on the concept of a registry. So shadcn registry is as simple as the copy paste. Shadcn registry is just a JSON file that has to be presented in your component library. We take a look at the documentation for shadcn registry. By the way, keep in mind that I constantly refer to shadcn view documentation, but it's just plain copy of for shadcn documentation. The reason why I refer to shadcn view is because we are actually using shadcn viewport in the context of Duo UI Next, but because the core shadcn is written with React, but the documentation and functionality is exactly the same. So the documentation on shadcn registry can be found at this URL, and it explains that JSON file that I was talking about. So there is the overall schema for the registry file, registry.json, and there is a separate schema for listing the registry items. Registry JSON, and then registry items should follow the where is this? And then registry items have this a bit overwhelming at first schema, but let's talk about the registry and registry item in the context of shadcn. So as I said, registry is the overall JSON file that contains the list of registry items. Every registry item is technically one component, one library, one utility, one something, a redistributed piece of software that you want to be available in your library. It can be a component, it can be anything really. The point is you specify a separate item entry, item in the registry that represents your component or your item that you want to distribute, listing the dependencies, listing all of the files that constitute that or another component, that or another library. We will take a look at the example right now, but the main idea is registry in shadcn is technically your public API of your component library. Whatever is in your registry.json constitutes your public API of your component library. Whatever is not there won't be exposed as public and won't be installable by the consumer projects. Let's take a look at the registry.json that we have in Duo UI Next. So here's the main schema for the overall registry, and then there are these items. So technically speaking, this is all it takes for the registry of your overall component library. The main excitement and trick and complexity comes in this item. So every item here follows the schema as represented here for registry item, and there are different props here. As you can see, we can specify different things, but the main here are type, like name is important because that's the name of your component or your shareable entry in your registry. that the shadcn has to have access to. So name, title and description, self-explanatory, but there is this type. So you, for every item in your registry, you have to specify the type. And as you can see, there are plenty of options to pick depending on the type of the item you want to be installable in consumer projects. So it can be a lib, it can be block. As we mentioned in the previous video, block is for complex components where your custom component depends on different other custom components. Simple component, where usually it is your custom component that uses mainly the simple UI primitives like buttons, text areas. UI is the UI primitive. Hook is for React hooks. Theme for themes. Page for complete pages that can contain several blocks. File, just if you want to, you can make a regular file distributed with exactly the same delivery system. Just a file. It shouldn't be anything complex, anything more than just a file. And style, so for, again, to support the theming. But then if we take a look at the current registry JSON file in Duo UI Next, so we have name, we have type for UI, like we are talking about only this animated dots entry here. So it is the UI primitive. It's a simple component with just 3 animated dots. And then dependencies is one of the important entries in these items. So dependencies is the list of the npm packages that your component, this particular component, animated dots in this case, depend on. So you list npm packages here. Then there is the files entry. This is the meat of your item, so to speak. This is where you define the files that constitute your registry item. In this particular case, we want to distribute the view component. So we specify path to this view component, and we specify that it is actually the unit primitive. Based on this category, on this type of the item, shadcn knows where to copy it in the consumer projects. In this particular case, this component, when installed in a consumer project, will go to src/ui. If it would be a registry component, it would be src/components. So that's, oh, actually, wait a second. Registry UI goes to src/components/UI. Component would go to src/components/component. Registry lib would go the same, src components lib, and so on and so on. But here is where you specify all the things that have to be bundled with your component. These are dependencies that are going to be installed in the consumer project in order for this component to work. And these are the files, in this particular case, it's just one file, that have to be copied over, not even installed, but copied over. Remember, we said that shadcn registry is just technically the syntactical sugar on top of just copy pasting. So this component, file for this component, will be copied over to the consumer project together with installing this dependency. We have several types of entries here. So let's take a look at this item, button utils. This is not a view component. If you take a look at the files, it's the TS file. So it is just the utility. It's the lib. So we specify registry lib, and actually for your main file of your item, the good practice is have the same registry type for the overall item and for the file that you're going to be copying to consumer project. This entry doesn't have dependencies, so it doesn't depend on the npm packages, but what it has is the registry dependencies. So registry dependencies is the type of dependencies where we specify components that are distributed with shadcn registry. So components that can be installed by shadcn to have a better understanding of what this can be, we'll take a look at the next component. But just remember that registry dependencies is to specify dependencies that are registered with shadcn registry. It can be default shadcn registry, in our case shadcn view registry, so we just take the button component, or it can be a URL. Again, we will take a look at this in a second, and I will talk about this more. So this is the entry for TS, just for the library file. And here is another example. So copy button, again, this is just the library file, one file, so registry lib, all in sync. But in registry dependencies, it doesn't list components by name that can be found in shadcn view registry. So technically, in order to install button, it will be shadcn will run command like npx shadcn view latest add button. That's what button means. But for these entries, it's technically going to be the same. So it is the equivalent of shadcn add and then the URL. You can install shadcn components using URL as well. But let's talk about the structure of these URLs here. So when you refer to a component, to a dependency by URL, this means that it should be served from the specified URL as the component. When you run in your component library or any library that is driven by shadcn delivery, you can build the registry with the special command. In context of Duo UI, it is just yarn build. So what will happen is shadcn will go to the registry.json and go one item at a time and build a separate JSON file for that particular component in order to provide this system where one rectangle is one component with its own dependencies. So it iterates over the items and creates the JSON file. The files specified here are just copied into the JSON file. We will take a look at the example of JSON file in a second. So the content will be just copied into the JSON file, but the dependencies will be referenced like this. So with the URL in registry dependencies, what we say is that we have to fetch such a JSON file for a component buttons utils from this URL. What is this URL? Well, technically, this URL is just URL to my local storybook, localhost 6006. When you build shadcn components, they are by default output into the public /r/JSON file. So let's take a look at this structure. So public /r/ and then the list of the things. So when we say that we have to add that this component, actually, let's take a look at this component so that we have a better understanding. So as you can see, it does import button utils and tooltips utils. And that's exactly what we need here. Buttons utils and tooltips utils, they have to be part of this component when the component gets installed. So these components, they are separate entries, but they have to be installed as well. And for example, for buttons utils, it means installing component from this file. Again, as I said, when everything in the files will just get the content fetched from the local system. The type isn't changed, the path isn't changed, but the content gets edited and becomes the content of the file that gets created in the consumer project. So tooltips, utils, same thing here. Where is it? Tooltips, utils. Again, content is part of the JSON file. So these JSON files are actually exactly what shadcn will install in order to introduce your component into a consumer project. But the reasonable question here would be, why do I specify my local host, or like the URL to my local storybook? The reason to this is that I do want these components, when I locally developed these components, I want them to be available for all of my consumer projects that I might want to try this component in. And in order to for those consumer projects to use one of these components, let's say copy button, what they will need to do is do npx shadcn latest add copy button, but not just copy button, because specifying the name without URL means shadcn will get to the default shadcn view registry. It will fail because there is no copy button component in the shadcn registry. So I will have to specify it with the URL localhost 6006/r/opbutton.json. Then shadcn will know that it has to get to that JSON at localhost and download that component. So this means that I have to have my server, or storybook in this particular case, running in order for shadcn to get access to this. Now, what happens with these local hosts when we deploy, when we will, let's say, push this to do UI next to create a release? Consumers have to be able to just install components all the way from the public URL, right? Not from some local host. For that, when we run, let's do it this way. I will just show the example. So we'll delete public and we will delete the dev folder. So when we run, let's keep the storybook running. So yarn build. What happens here is that we actually built two registries. So one is the dev registry with localhost 6006, and it outputs things into the dev R folder. So if you take a look at what is this, so copy button, in the dev R, you will see these URLs. So when I want to install this component, the local one, in one of my consumer projects, I would have to install it with localhost 6006/r/opbutton.json URL. And then all of these dependencies will be fetched exactly from localhost 6006 as well. As long as my storybook running, they will be available. However, at the same time, we are also building the production level registry that is by default in the public /r. And if we check copy button component there, you will see that all of the URLs are updated with the public URL. So the URL where our storybook is running for the UI, and then these components as dependencies for the copy button will be fetched from our public URL if this component is installed from https://gitlab/org.gitlab.io. So for the convenience, we are building two registries in the context of Duo UI Next, one for dev, one for production. You don't need to think about this at all. When you work with registry, you just stick with your local host, whatever is running, and the port that is running, that your storybook is running on, and 6006 is the default port. When you run yarn build, it will build things automatically, both for the local development and for production environment for you. But the thing is that for anybody dealing with registry for the first time, it might be a bit intimidating, but a bit overwhelming, because again, if we take a look at this schema, there are a lot of things here, right? So it's easy to get lost. So for that, we have a helper tool, which is very powerful. Here in UI Next, actually, we can open package.json. So the Yarn health check script. So if we start Yarn health check and run it, actually, this is interesting. And this is actually the way it has to be. Now, what Yarn health check does is it goes through all of the components in src registry default. So goes through all of the components or items like libraries, UI components, and builds sort of its representation of how the registry for all of those items should look like. So by default, it assumes that everything within src registry default is the public API of this package. Then it goes to registry.json and reads what is actually declared as the public API of this component library. And if there are mismatches, it will raise an issue. If there are no issues, it will just say that all of the components are healthy and things are really well. So let's just mimic a situation where the component that we migrated in our previous tool, the message tool approval, didn't get any entry. So you just created the component or copied component and you just didn't want to deal with the registry. What happens if we run Yarn health check now? You see, it says message tool approval, and then there is an error. Message tool approval component is not registered in registry.json. But not only it raises an error, it also says found one component's missing from registry. Message tool approval. And add missing components to registry. And you say, yes. There is a glitch here that because we don't rerun the health check, so you just need to rerun health check manually. And again, bang, we don't have any issues and the message tool approval is back here. But not only that, imagine sort of, you don't even need to imagine probably. I'm not sure, actually we covered that, but when you create a new component from scratch, just like we created the placeholder for this message tool approval in the previous video, or for that UI component in the very first video, creates the entry, but it doesn't specify any registry dependencies or dependencies because it just doesn't know. The components don't have any implementations just yet, right? When you create the placeholder. So you might end up with the registry entry like this. And what happens when you run health check here? Yarn health check. It says missing shadcn view dependency in registry button and text area. So it notifies you that this component is missing the dependencies. Okay, you go in and say dependencies, and then it clearly tells you button and text area. We can go here to the component to double check things. And indeed, we need button and text area, right? We also need some npm package as the dependency here. Wait a second. Actually, this is shadcn view dependency. So it's registry dependencies. And we say button, text area. Okay. Now rerun. And we are actually fine. However, if you take a look here, it will tell you that it also has dependency as lucid view next and utils and view. The idea here is that all three of these, there is a very, very high chance that they are already installed in the consumer project, because you wouldn't be able to use shadcn without utils and shadcn view without view. And then when you install shadcn, Lucid and Lucid View Next as part of shadcn view will also be installed. But you can be very explicit and say, dependencies, and then say view, Lucid View Next, and that's going to be totally fine. That's not going to raise any error, any issue. It will just say, okay, this is fine. But there is one thing here. Adding these parts isn't very comfortable, right? So if you end up in this situation, then missing dependencies, what you can do as a very simple workaround, you just completely remove this entry, save, run health check again. Wait a second. Save registry. Now, right, yarn health check. And again, it asks whether you want to add the missing component into registry. And if you press yes, watch what will happen. It actually automatically adds dependencies and registry dependencies based on the imports in your component. So this is a very quick workaround. You just remove the entry from the registry, run health check, and agree for the tool to add it automatically. Then it will fetch all the needed imports automatically for you. But let's take a look at this tool. This tool, the health check, is much more than just that. If you started run it yarn health check with the health flag, you will see some information what it actually does. Auto fixing doesn't really work that well yet, but there is this verbose mode that is a very interesting thing. If you let me just run health check once again. So as you can see, for every item, even though it has all files healthy, there is this health score. For some files it's green, for some it's yellow. When it's above 90, between 90 and 100, it's going to be yellow. Between 80 and 90, it's going to be yellow. I'm sorry, between 90 and 100, it will be green. And between 80 and 90, it will be yellow. Where does this health score come from, and what is this? Where do we lose points? Because 100 is the maximum. This is where, and if you take a look here at the end, it says suggestions, 112 suggestions in the whole registry. You can run health check in verbose mode, either be very verbose and write verbose or just -v. And in this case, you'll get more information for every component, much more information. It will check all the presence of all the required files. For example, for a UI component, it should have view, test, stories, MDX, advanced stories, or storybook. And for every file type, it will provide you with the hints of how to make improvements in that or another type of files. Sometimes these are false positives, so you have to be very careful with this, but there are also exceptions. If you take a look, I don't really remember the component. I think, can it be the loader? Nope, not loader. Can it be the animated dot? No. Yes, no, yes. Yes. If you take a look at the animated.stories TS, there is the ESLint-like syntax. So in the comment, health check disable, and then you specify the checks to disable on this particular file. Story variants, accessibility stories, responsive design, because for some components, these don't make sense. And where do you get this types of the checks? Well, very easy. every suggestion has it in the square brackets before the suggestion. So you can just disable that or another type of health check for that or another file. But if you think that it's not a big deal, just leave it. And then it's a bit fun to just get things closer to 100 by ticking all of these things and addressing all of those suggestions. So this is the verbose mode, but the more components you have, the more sort of heavy the output will be. So the yarn health check also supports health check for a particular component. So you have to use the name as it is specified in the registry. So let's say we want to get to for the let's go with that message tool approval. So you can specify by name yarn health check message tool approval, and then you get the compact version, or you can do it with -v, and then you get with all of the suggestions. So this is a great way to actually iterate over different files and take different boxes, like address different suggestions, and get a much higher score than, and in this case, 92. So every suggestion, non-addressed suggestion, draws 1 point from the score. So that's why we have 8 suggestions. That's why the score is 92 out of 100 for this particular component. So this is the tool that is very helpful, that allows you to keep things sane without thinking too much about registry. It automates a lot of boring stuff, allowing you to focus on actually creating the stuff, creating the components, creating the libraries, and maintaining good quality within the component. All the registration, all the registry additions can be managed by this tool. So this is probably going to be the end of this video, and the actual usage of these custom components in the consumer projects will go to the next video. But here it is important to remember several things. So shadcn, compared to NPM packaging, shadcn provides a very flexible delivery system, which is very simple. It is based on JSON file, which is called registry.json, that lists all of the registry items that you want your component library to expose to the outside world as the public API of your component library. Contrary to the NPM packaging, shadcn registry, shadcn delivery system allows you to install one component at a time. You don't need to pull in all the dependencies of the component library. You can focus on tiny little bits. When it comes to the registry in Duo UI Next specifically, there is this very, very handy tool called yarn health check. Like the tool is called health check, but you run it with the yarn command. That allows you to keep your actual components, your actual implementation in the src registry default folder with the registry.json file, so that you do not need to care to tinker a lot with registry manually. It will just do things automatically. It will update the registries. It will notify you if something is missing. It will notify you if there are some orphan dependencies in the registry JSON that are not needed for actual component. For example, you evolved the component and it got rid of some of the dependencies that are still in registry JSON. So when you create a new component for Duo UI Next with yarn component, it creates the registry registry entry automatically for you. It doesn't update it when you update the component. You continue working with the component, you continue adding the dependencies, but your registry entry doesn't get updated automatically. That's when it is very beneficial to run yarn health check when you're done with your component, so that health check would check what are the actual dependencies and registry dependencies that you have to add to your registry in order for your component to be properly installable in the consumer projects, properly available. And then when you need to publish your components, we run yarn build, and it will create two different builds, one for dev environment and one for the production environment. You don't even need to think about the different URLs or anything. It will just do this automatically. That's pretty much it with this. And in the next video, we finally will start adding the custom components into the Vue 3 application. The components from our custom registry, from our Do UI next, and we'll see how that part works. See you in the next video.